Let's go now to our favorite position halls, talk some football. We got the juice out of the way. That's what the people wanted. Now we can kind of nerd out a little bit. And I'm going to start first. I'm going to start with our boy Nick Eason, defensive line coach at Clemson. This guy has killed it. I'm going to go state by state here because he's had to go to enemy territory to land some of the best players in the country. Peter Woods from the state of Alabama. If you have not watched him, do yourself a favor and turn on the tape of Peter Woods. He is arguably the most entertaining player in this class. You can do so many different things with him. 6'3", 275 pounds. You can stand him up. He can play with his hand in the dirt as well, but a freakish athlete, and we love him. And he's going to play with some other guys that are going to complement him really well in the state of Georgia, starting with Vic Burleigh, a top 32 player for us in the top 247. Played in the odd front last year, was more of a 4 technique, but can play certainly in passing down situations as a 3 technique. But he's a big body. I don't think his value necessarily shows up in the stat sheet. Had only 5 sacks last season, but this is a guy that's only going to get better at the next level. And another top 247 standout, AJ Hoffler from Woodward Academy, had double-digit sacks last season. And Stephon Green, a guy that we certainly like, and we've talked a lot about. Clemson faithful, we have heard you on that one. And then to round it out, David Ojigbe, the edge rusher from Washington, D.C. So much to like about him. He's another guy that's pretty multiple. And people might say, wow, this is a tremendous class for Nick Eason and Dabo Swinney, and it is, but it's important for a couple different reasons. Not only are you getting very talented players, but the guys going out, the potential NFL departures for Clemson. You're talking about a handful of guys, Brian Brisset, Tyler Davis, Miles Murphy, and Xavier Thomas could all be playing on Sundays very soon. So Clemson getting it done. That is my favorite positional haul so far. I love what they're doing.
Coop, that's a good one, man. And, you know, when I think defensive line position haul, I think what stands out about that group for Clemson is those are guys that, in theory, should be able to see the field in 2023. Now, are they going to take 60 snaps? Probably not, but I think they can get in there, provide some rotation, and that's why it's so important for our guy, Nick Eason. I mean, he's done an excellent job. We talked about it a few weeks ago on our other show. I mean, has anyone had as good of a 6-month stretch for him? Speaking of 6-month stretches, my favorite position haul, I think, out there, and you know, aside from Ohio State and the wide receivers, but we've talked so much about them. How about this group of linebackers Georgia has committed? Right now, they have the number 2, number 3, number 4 linebackers all in the boat when you look at our rankings. We'll start at the top. C.J. Allen, multi-sport guy, 11-1 in the 100-meter dash. Raylan Wilson right behind him. He's a kid from Tallahassee that Georgia flipped from Michigan. And then closing it out, Troy Bowles, who announced this past weekend that he was going to play for UGA. He's obviously the son of defensive coordinator, now Tampa Bay Buccaneers head coach Todd Bowles. So he's got the football smarts. You know, I thought it'd be a fun exercise, Coop, to try to compare these guys to some current Georgia linebackers or some recent Georgia linebackers. I thought that'd be a fun exercise. So I was doing that before we started the show. You know, Troy Bowles, to me, and this might be a little outrageous of a comp, but I see some Roquan Smith in his game a little bit. You know, I think he's a smart guy with plenty of range, instinctual. He's actually going to play safety for his high school this upcoming season, which I think is unique because as a freshman, he was primarily an edge rusher. Raylan Wilson, this is a guy that runs a 10.9 at 225 pounds, which is a bit freaky. You're going to see him at the freaks list at some point down the line. He reminds me a little of Channing Tyndall. You know, I saw Channing Tyndall down here in South Florida a few weeks ago, and I was like, man, I know this is an NFL player. What position is this guy? Because I thought he was a D lineman. No, that's an off-ball linebacker. And I think if you saw Raylan Wilson in person, the average man, the average common scout would think the exact same thing. So he's a speed body type for me. And then finally, C.J. Allen. You know, this is another, I don't love this comp, but maybe Nakobe Dean. You know, C.J. Allen's a little bit undersized. Nakobe Dean, a little undersized. Obviously, he went on to have an excellent career on Saturdays, and now he's with the Philadelphia Eagles. But I think there's a little C.J. Allen in terms of an undersized playmaker that's very instinctual. So love that group. And really what Georgia's doing in the front seven in general. I mean, look what they did last cycle. Jalen Walker, Marvin Jones. We heard Kirby Smart talk about Michael Williams at SEC Media Days. I mean, Georgia it's almost like an NFL front, and it could get even better here in the class of 2022 or 2023, They're involved with Damon Wilson, Cameron James, Jordan Hall. I mean, this is an elite group, and you know, I wouldn't be surprised if they have 5 more guys selected a few years from now in the first round of the NFL draft.
They are freaky, and I love the Roquan Smith comparison for Troy Bowles, but it was actually C.J. Allen that I thought was more the comp for Roquan Smith. But hey, listen, if one of your guys is getting comped to Roquan Smith, you're in really good shape there. So, Drew, I'm going to move on to the offensive side of the ball. And I've been going at it with Notre Dame fans on their message boards today. So this is my peace offering to you. But the offensive line is getting it done. And trust me, that's starting with Charles Jagasaw, a guy that we just recently moved into the top 32. We've talked a lot about his two-way ability. We've talked a lot about his ability as a wrestler, 41-0 on the mat, but a couple other guys as well stand out from North Carolina. Sullivan Absher, who plays in a triple option offense. We certainly like him. He mans the right side. He's going to have to adjust a little bit in terms of pass protection, but is certainly a guy that kind of fits the mold of what Notre Dame wants to do. And then a couple of other guys, Joe Otting from Kansas. And, I was trying to explain this to Irish fans. They're like, why are you so high on this guy? You start to look at him and you look at his multi-sport background. He plays basketball, track and field. He's got a great background in javelin, shot put, discus, all of it. I was watching the basketball tape and this guy was really light-footed. I'm a big basketball guy, so seeing that he can play either guard spot, I think it's going to be a natural progression to the center position. And then not to mention Elijah Page from Pinnacle down there in Arizona and went to the same school as tackle Tosh Baker at Notre Dame. So Notre Dame has done a tremendous job on the offensive line. They for a long time have been recognized as one of the best developers of offensive line talent. It's good to see that has not really changed much with Marcus Freeman at the helm. But Drew, that's it for me. Who's your last one in favorite position, Hall?
Well, I got two takes right here on Notre Dame, right? Sullivan Ashbury. I think a lot of people don't know this. He's a scratch golfer, or not a scratch golfer. I think he's like a +5 or 6 handicap, low round of 74 for a big man. And the other thing that stands out to me about the Notre Dame group of offensive linemen committed is these are all guys that are just offensive linemen, right? They're not worrying about their top 10s, top 8s, all this stuff. Like, they want to play football. And I think when I look at what Notre Dame has had success, the Quentin Nelsons, the Rodney Stanleys, those weren't big, sexy recruitments. Those were guys that came in and they, wanted to get to work. And when I look at this group, I think that's a potential starting 5 for the Irish. So Marcus Freeman, Tommy Rees, those guys deserve a ton of credit for what they've done up front. I'm gonna stick in the Midwest. I guess you could call it the Midwest or Northeast, or whatever you want to call it. My next position group that I love, Penn State, right? What they're doing in the secondary is elite at the safety position. And really, all these guys can play different positions. When I look at the Penn State defensive back call right now, I call it a full spread of options. They got guys that can do a little bit of anything. King Mack, top of the list. I think he's one of the most competitive kids in the class of 2023. State champ in the 400-meter dash. Won a state title this past season at St. Thomas Aquinas. I also love the kid that's right next to him in the secondary, Conrad Hussey. And I know, Cooper, you were talking with a former SEC assistant coach over the weekend, and they brought up the fact that Conrad Hussey might be one of his favorite prospects in the state of Florida at all. And I think, it got me thinking, are we a little too low on this kid right now? Or are we too low on him? He's got a sub 11 in the 100-meter dash. I think he can play in the box. I think he can play over the top. You pair that with Elliott Washington, who's a top 247. We haven't listed him as a safety, but he's a corner that Penn State was able to flip from Alabama. And then to top it all off, you got Takari Nelson, who's got 6'3", 200 pounds. He can move around. So I like what Penn State has done. They got a top 5 recruiting class, and I think the strength of this group really is in that secondary.
3 out of the 5 defensive backs that are pledged to James Franklin in the Penn State Nittany Lions from the state of Florida. Takari Nelson also from Alabama, not to mention another top 247 pass rusher, Tamarian Parker, a top 50 player there. So the Nittany Lions getting it done in the South. Drew, how much has Manny Diaz, the former head coach of Miami, played a part in really what we've seen, I guess, in Penn State's surge in the state of Florida?
I think he's had a hand in it, right? I don't think he deserves all of the credit for what Penn State has done. And, Manny Diaz, he could have spent, this whole entire year, somewhere in the Florida Keys. I know he's got a property down there not working, but he's a guy that's aggressive. He wants to write his name and rebuild his image, and that's why he's up at Penn State, and he's going to be the defensive coordinator. I bumped into Manny Diaz, back during the spring evaluation period, and he was at St. Thomas Aquinas to look at Conrad Hussey, to look at King Mack. So I think he's had a big role in it. And I also think Jawan Sider, who has ties to the Muck in South Florida, he deserves some credit as well for what Penn State's done. But those guys are always going to recruit the state of Florida well, and Manny Diaz is only making it easier for James Franklin and co.